Hi, I'm Kristen, and today I'm going to show you how to make this scrappy X marks the scrap quilt. It's a free, super simple foundation paper pieced pattern, which is perfect for beginners and for using up all of your leftover scraps. So you might have heard me talk about this quilt being in the works before. So I basically designed it as a way to use some scrappy strips that I made. So if you've seen my previous video, or not, I'll link to it anyway, on how to sew small scraps to adding machine paper, sometimes called like adding machine tape or cash register roll. And it's just a way of kind of clearing your scraps. I like to do it in a slightly color themed sort of a way. I'm not sure if you can see these all. But if you don't want to do that, you can also use a couple other things. So you could use the made fabric that I have another video about, which is how to use your kind of like a regularly shaped scraps to make a new piece of fabric. That's like when the fabric's sort of all one pattern or all one color. You can also use strips on adding machine or some other foundation paper of selvage edges. So these could all be selvage edges in the middle. And then the easiest, quickest way would be to just use up your ends of 2.5-inch strips, so like the ends of jelly roll strips and things that you haven't used all of and you just have sitting around. The background is also scrappy, so you're going to see in the cutting directions, it's going to annoy some people, but if you're scrappy like me, you'll love it. Basically, I'm going to tell you how to cut the fabric for one block, which is made up of 4 quarter blocks. So this is a block. This ends at 12.5 inches squared. That's with the seam allowance. And I'm going to give you the cutting instructions for this, but basically for the quarter block, because it's just repeated. It's just the same block over and over again. So you can be making these as you go along. The idea is that the background, you could be using up, bits of background fabric that you had extra of when you made something else, low volume fat quarters that you've got lying around that you don't know what to do with. I use the same fabrics for the background and then use them up for the binding. So I made a kind of scrappy, low volume binding to match the quilt, which I quite liked. So I might do that again, have the binding match the background. Anyway, so you can go totally scrappy with it. If you don't want to do that, obviously you can use all the same fabric for the back, but that's the idea behind it. So I'm going to show you how to make one block. And then I'll just show you a bit more about how I put it together and quilted it and all the rest of that. Okay, so this is a quarter block pattern for the X marks the spot quilt block. So you need 4 of them. So you print at 100% scale on your printer. I've done it on regular printer paper, not because it's the best paper to use for this, but just because it's the kind most people have. But if you have specialist foundation paper, piecing paper, go ahead and use that. So you want to cut it out, leaving this. So the space between these 2 lines is your 1/4-inch seam allowance. So don't cut that off. Basically, so cut around this edge so that you end up with this. So there's going to be 4 of them. And then there's also a sheet that has the templates for cutting your fabric patches, so you know what size you need your scraps to be. There's also measurements, rough guides on the website if you'd prefer to use that. If you are using the templates and you're new to foundation paper piecing, please cut your patches even bigger than this, because otherwise you have to be super precise not to have things going a bit short and things like that. This is an easy foundation paper piecing pattern for beginners, but that's usually the most common frustration with foundation paper piecing, is that you've kind of flipped your, so you've sewn your piece and then you flip the other one and you think it's long enough and it just doesn't quite go. So I would always cut my pieces a little bit bigger. So for example, this is the template piece for this end bit here. So you see how big that is. And then this is how big I've actually cut my pieces, just to make sure. So the measurements on the website are going to be more like this bigger size, just so you know. And same for the sort of side pieces. And now the quilt that I made with this pattern was mostly my scrappy strips, and I'll link to the video for that, which is where you sew small strips to like adding paper. It's kind of a way of doing crumb quilting, and I've kind of color coordinated them as I always do, but somehow I made the whole quilt and I didn't take a video of making a block. So I'm gonna do them now with another type of way of using your scraps, which I did use for like a couple quarter blocks in this quilt, which is the made fabric. And there's another video for that as well. And this is a pattern piece that I already cut the 1/4 inch seam off of. But anyway, so you can also see I've made it a little bit bigger as well. Don't cut the 1/4 inch seam off. That's just because I've already used this before. So anyway, so I will show you how it comes together and come back at the end. Okay, so you're going to take your quarter block pattern to your sewing machine and start with the first smallest piece, which is kind of like the end of the strip in the middle. So it's the low volume end to the strip. I like to put this in place with a dab of glue with a glue stick. You might have seen that in some of my other foundation paper piecing tutorials. Sorry for the banging in the background, that's the neighbor. Anyway, then you take your central strip and you're going to try and line it up. So what I'm doing there is making sure that I've got at least a 1/4 inch over the line, because I'm sewing on the line, so I still need my 1/4 inch seam. So now I'm lining up the strip that goes in the middle and flipping to make sure it's going to go all the way to the edge of the block, and checking again with, because I'm using printer paper, checking with a light source to see that I'm sort of lining that up so that there's at least that 1/4 inch seam past the sewing line. So once I'm happy with that, put it down and sew right on the line. And I use a 1.5 stitch length, which is shorter than your regular kind of piecing stitch length. And that's so that you can easily perforate and cut away the paper, at the end. So you should be able to tear the paper away when you're ready. Don't do that right after you've sewn it. I'll tell you later in the video exactly when you should be doing that. So once I've finished that and I've flipped it and I can see that the strip reaches the end of the pattern, I just put a tiny dab of glue there, not too much because you don't want it to be difficult to get rid of the paper, but that's just so that when I'm trimming for my 1/4 inch seam on the 2 seams either side of the strip, that it's not like shifting around, because it is quite long. Because normally in foundation paper piecing, your pieces are probably a bit smaller. So because we have this long floppy strip, I just do a little bit of glue. And then what I'm going to do is trim off anything that's more than a 1/4 inch from the sewing line, which is that line I just folded the paper on. So I've done that off camera, and now I'm adding the next piece. I've sped the video up a little bit too here, because it's really basically just repeating the same thing. I'm lining it up to make sure that there's the 1/4 inch seam, and then I'm sewing along that sew line on the front of the pattern. And then I'm going to do the same for the other side. So I'm lining up my piece, and then first I've got to fold over that flap on the other side and trim off to a 1/4 inch. Trying to move the camera there. So trimming off everything I don't need, and then I'm going to get another piece. You can see I've got 3 different low volume fabrics for the background here, so you can go really scrappy with this if you want to, and then just sew along the line, and then once you are done with that, you're gonna iron all those seams, iron them all away from the central block, not open, and then trim it down. So it should look like that. Okay, so once you have 4 blocks, you're going to just lay them out, just rotate them in order to make that X shape. So you don't need any different pattern. It's the 1/4 block pattern just over and over again. And then you're going to sew the top 2 together and try and line up those where the color and the white pieces meet. That's what I was trying to show you on the camera there, as best you can. If you're super precise, you pin and all that stuff, this definitely lines up. I've done it, but if you can't be bothered, if it's a little bit off, it still looks good. So don't worry about that too much. So just line it up as best you can. If you want to do the trick, you could be sticking a pin in on the corner, your top corner, to see if it comes out at the same place on the other side is a good way to do it, but I obviously don't always do that. So then once that's finished, we're then going to join the bottom together. You see there, it's matched pretty well, and this one not as well. So sometimes I would unpick that, but I think it's good enough and I want to get on with the video, so I'm just going to leave it. It's up to you how precise you want to be. So you're going to leave all the rest of the paper on, but you need to remove this small strip of paper from the seam, so where you've already sewn, just to remove that bulk, and then you're going to iron open the seams, and then I've cut away there, and now I'm back with my 2 halves, and I'm going to sew them together. So what you really need to line up here is the 2 opened middle seams, and that's going to help make sure your X comes out as straight as it can. So that's why I'm holding my thumb right there on the middle. You can obviously pin or clip or whatever, but I've just got my thumb sitting there until I sew through it, and then I kind of stop and line up the rest, because I often can't be bothered with pins or clips or any of that stuff. And then it's just the same process. Once you're finished sewing all the way down here, you're going to take away that small strip of paper for your 1/4 inch seam, and you're going to iron it open, and that's going to be your block. Okay, so don't rush to take your papers out. I don't take my foundation papers out until I am finished making my quilt top. So I made a throw size. It was 20 blocks plus a 6.5 inch border. You can find all of the details for that on the website. The link's in the description. But I don't take the papers off until that's all completed and done, just so that nothing stretches and moves. It is a bit of a faff. It's the faffiest bit of it, but put on some nice music or some Netflix and you can get it done. I decided to practice some really scrappy ruler quilting for this, so I didn't mark it out ahead of time. I just tried some things. Some of them worked, some of them didn't, but I think the overall effect is pretty good, but you don't need to do that at all. Straight line quilting would work just fine. Okay, so this is the block we made. So I've not trimmed this down, so it's roughly 12.5 inch square. Obviously I've already made my quilt, so this might become a cushion. So if you want to try this and you don't want to commit to a whole quilt, you can absolutely use the cutting instructions to just make a little throw cushion or something. And you can also, so the reason this quilt took me so long to do was because I was just kind of, as I finished a project and I had a pile of scraps, I was making my scrappy strips, and then as I had some low volume, I was cutting that, so it wasn't like I made it all at once. So I was building up the blocks. So it's kind of one where you can stash it away and then decide when you think you have enough, you want to put it together and make whatever size quilt you like. This one is a throw size. I'll put it on the website, the exact dimensions, but I think it's roughly 60 by 72 inches, something like that. I'm a bit free-form sometimes with my sizes, but I have calculated it and put it on the website for you. So I hope you enjoyed this, and I'd love to see if you make an X marks the scrap quilt. And if you enjoy videos like this and scrappy quilting like this, then please do subscribe, hit the bell for notifications, like and comment, and let me know what you think. And thanks so much for spending time with me.